Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, "Take my dog away from me, I will take your children away from you." This takes place in 2016. I bought my first apartment when it was 2015 and everything was nice. The park was close, neighbors were very nice, except for one. When I first moved in, they saw me outside one day and invited me over. They offered me cake and coffee and they seemed pretty nice, but they abused their children. I could hear them screaming every day, every single day. I didn't say anything because I don't have kids and don't really know how to parent yet. Fast forward to 2016, the kids scream every day. Other than that, everything is fine. I have a good job and overall a good life there at the time. I have even adopted a super cute breed of dachshund and another dog I don't know about. His name is Ronnie. I was walking Ronnie just coming from the park. Keep in mind, I'm a huge dog person. Seeing any dog get hurt breaks my heart because they give you so much love. You as an owner are everything to them and they for you are just a pet. Ronnie for me is everything. I don't know what I would do if I lost him. I saw the neighbor come and she waved, I waved back, she got closer and a conversation started. This conversation is very important, it is where all of it started. I cannot remember it very well, but I will assume some last words. Neighbor and me, neighbor, "He's adorable, boy or girl?" Me, "He's a boy," smiling. Neighbor, "And what is his breed? He looks like one of those black long dogs." Me, "Yes, a dachshund, a mix between two different breeds actually." The conversation went on and we were talking. It was slippery as hell. The winters in Finland we were talking until I slept. I slipped and accidentally kicked Ronnie in his chest. And I don't know what went through this crazy woman, but she took my dog, ran into her house, and the next thing I know, I'm at her door begging, pounding. She had called police and animal protection services. I went to her door. I was there for nearly an hour, I think, until I went to my door, got in and called my parents. They told me to wait until tomorrow, so my dumbass did so. I know what you're thinking, where's the revenge? Coming right up, sir. I won't bore you anymore. I lost my dog, he was taken away from me and I was planning my revenge. So I thought, they take from me, I will take from them. Remember how I said they abused their children? I saw the daughter with a blue eye and got a picture. I also recorded the screaming and through this mic I used you could hear every word. It went from, "Who the F do you think you are talking back at us?" which followed with a slap. After a week of gathering evidence, I went to CPS or some office, I showed them the evidence, they went to a different room and came back saying, "We will handle this. Clearly child abuse is going on. Thank you for reporting this." Police and some fancy people showed up one day. I heard the screams from the corridor, I heard the pounding at my door a day later, I heard screaming and begging. That didn't affect me. Last year, January 14th. I then got Ronnie back from this wonderful elderly couple who took care of him. Apparently my story made more sense about what happened to the dog and I still regret nothing. I'm not sure what happened to them, I never really saw them again. My family thinks I went too far, so we don't really bring it up. I hope that woman lives a sad life, just like me when I lost Ronnie. And guys, I gotta say, I am pretty baffled at how the OP heard children screaming all the time and didn't report this to CPS earlier. But I guess then again, in some households, children screaming is apparently normal. It certainly wasn't in mine. But I'm curious, if you would hear children screaming almost every day at your neighbor's place, would you call CPS or the police on them or not? Let us know in the comments. And the next one is titled, "Try to stop me building one house. I will build two instead and block the neighbor's view." So I bought a house in the UK that had a large piece of land in the back garden. Almost all other houses in the street had houses built in their gardens, easily 90%, so I thought this would be a no-brainer on getting planning permission from the local city government to build one house. What I didn't anticipate was the neighborhood busybody curtain twitcher living next door to me. Let's call her Kay. Kay tried everything in her power to stop me. She organized a neighborhood residents association hate campaign to complain to local politicians to prevent the planning permission being granted to build the house. She lied her ass off and talked about how if the house was built, traffic would increase and small children would be run over. Insane Lies. I spent 3 years fighting Karen and the local residents association and the politicians. A long, painful and expensive battle, but I won. Eventually I got my planning to build one house. But what Karen failed to realize was I was working with 2 other neighbors with land to the rear of their houses to ensure all 3 of us would get planning permission to build houses on our respective rear gardens. Neighbor J was to the left-hand side of busybody neighbor K, I was on the right-hand side of busybody K, and neighbor M was to the right of my property, as below: J house, K house, I house and M house. After planning permission to build houses on our respective rear gardens was granted, I bought the land to the rear of J house. I then built 2 houses, one behind J house and one behind I house. Now, every morning when Kay opens her bedroom rear window curtains and looks into her backyard, there is a middle finger poking up, house, to the left of her backyard and a middle finger house to the right of her backyard. F you, Karen, enjoy the view. And I gotta say guys, for this story I would have loved to have some kind of drawing from the OP to better understand the situation, but I think overall the story was still understandable. And the last one is from r/ripe stories, was posted by user sudo_beerme, and it is titled A Wild Methy Neighbor Appears. This story goes back to about 2003 or 2004. And really is only a tale of how hard drugs can really turn people into violent parodies of themselves. It's essentially a Neighbors from Hell story, but its end could also give the tag of life stories as well. One of my friends lived in what we called the slanty shanty, not really too crunchy or anything, just a house raised up on stilts so you could park your car comfortably underneath it. It was one house that had been divided into 3 flats or apartments if you will. For namesake, the floors were not terribly even and most of, if not all, the residents were a bit on the fringe as far as the old herb was concerned. To be fair, it was pretty peaceful, no one interfered with anyone and kept to themselves. We actually realized that we knew the neighbors in the front apartment when they were leaving one day out the front door and down the steps while we were coming past into my friend's apartment on the side of their house. Imagine 4 sketchy young blokes leaving and 4 equally sketchy looking young blokes entering. It was almost like the scene in Lock and Stock and 2 Smoking Barrels, where the 2 criminal crews were living next door to each other without knowing it. It was not until we were inside that we realized that we had gone to school with 2 of the chaps from the front apartment, and over the next few weeks we became reacquainted with each other over the time-honored tradition of biting each other for duries, cigs and rolly tobacco. We were playing hacky sack in the backyard one afternoon, not really that close to the neighbors over the back fence or being loud at all, when a wild meth head neighbor from over said back fence appeared out of his window, loudly saying, not quite yelling, to be quiet because his baby was sleeping, and called us some choice words into the bargain. Never mind his own outdoor activities with his friends and the noise that was generated. Anyway, our friend who had the side apartment apologized so to placate the wild meth head. Given that it was our friend that had to live next to him, we also acquiesced, hoping our capitulation would appease his methy agitations. We then went inside to play GameCube and have smoko. This seemed odd because we had already met him once before and he seemed reasonable and even offered us a smoke. This sudden change in behavior was telling at the very least. This was only the first encounter that really started it all though. Over the weeks the backyard pretty much became off limits so as not to incur the meth beast's wrath. I should say he was not particularly big, but he was built well, and incidentally he didn't mind the odd scrap as he would box in his backyard with some of his friends. We ended up recognizing some of them from high school as being a few years older than us. They mostly had reputations of violence and hard drug use. One of them, I believe, was a Golden Gloves boxer too. Needless to say, we were not of that caliber and for the sake of relative peace kept our distance. The chap who rented the front apartment seemed to be on good terms with him, maybe because of natural distance he didn't have to put up with him, I don't know. Fine by us anyway, until one fateful night there was a blackout and a few of us left to get some spare candles of our parents. We drove back and as we were pulling up, most of the people in the apartments were outside in the moonlight due to the lack of light in the dwellings. Our friend, the methy neighbor, was out on the footpath as we pulled up to the roadside and parked. I barely saw him as we went past because I was in the back seat. We started handing out a few extra candles and I noticed methy neighbor kind of just standing on his own with his arms crossed. I said to a friend, I will see if he wants a candle. Big effing mistake, the rest is the best I can recollect. As I got close, I could see that he was muttering to himself and I casually said, "Hey man, you want a candle? We got a few spare." MN, "You ignore me, a-hole, what do you want?" Instant rage from him and instant regret from me. His fist seemed to just fly from his body and caught me square in the mouth. Fun. I had stood right beside him, so when he hit me it was not at full extension, so I got off with a fat lip, which was light. I staggered backwards in shock. I'd be hit in the head with a golf club intentionally on 2 separate occasions before, but this was different. I had never been blindsided before. Everyone, thank Christ, was standing there, so about 8 people were instantly going into diffuse mode. The chap who rented the front apartment had been standing at his steps with a bat for some reason, maybe worried that the more scummy individuals of the neighborhood might take chance of robbing people in the blackout, I don't know, but he was completely at ease and non-threatening. Sort of just leaning on it like a walking stick for the most part. He and everyone else started to try and calm Methy down, saying he was just offering you a candle, mate. And what's wrong? What happened? Everyone stood around while this man breathed like he was a hissing steam engine, flexing his arms with his fists balled like Goku, powering up. No joke, he looked like he was going Super Saiyajin and trying to take everyone on. I think the combination of old mate leaning on the bed and the sheer numbers of everyone just standing around made him think better of it. With the final release of hissing steam, he turned around and walked off muttering to himself. That was that, so we went and had smoko while waiting for the power to come back on so we could play GameCube or watch The Simpsons. A few days later I dropped over to see what was happening. He had been by the front apartment and left one of his own designer shirts as an apology. Old mate in the front apartment had dropped it over to my mate in the side apartment because the meth had left his system and the beast had finally calmed down enough to realize he had embarrassed himself. My friend said to just take it. I refused and said the apology is enough and that I want nothing to do with his presence as long as he keeps acting erratically. As the months progressed, his erratic behavior didn't cease. Yelling one day because you're outside, biting you for a smoke the next, arguing with his mates in the backyard. I remember seeing him walking down with his missus one day, who to be honest was a bit of a looker, as she was pushing their daughter in a stroller. He had no shoes on and was starting to bloat from water retention due to his habit and seemed somewhat lackluster. Needless to say, no one wanted to really be around him except the most dedicated of users. Things were all coming to a head though. This was before crack was an issue. Well, where I'm from anyway, speed and crystal meth were staples now. Ecstasy was for going out, meth was for working, and as a result of the demand, the market was huge and open so that a lot of people were starting to dump product in for a quick payday. Personally, I've never had much to do with any of these substances, and here's why. About a year or so after my run-in with the methed out neighbor, I was talking to my mate in the slanty shanty and he told me all about the police and ambulance officers that had been next door. The neighbor had taken his own life. Hanging. Over the next few days, about 5 more people in town had seen themselves off too. They all had one thing in common. The same dealer. It was a bad batch that was flocked off for a quick quit and nobody had bothered to test it with a purity kit. Now half a dozen people were dead. When I was in high school, there were 3 addicts that came to speak to us, and to the chagrin of the teachers, they said one thing. We are not here to say don't do drugs, just if you do, make sure you get what you pay for. People put all sorts of nasty crap in there to try and make a few more dollars. Purity kits are cheap and can save your life. I respect their honesty. I take the same approach to these substances as I do gambling though. I just don't chance it to begin with. Sorry for the dark ending, but at times I think about that neighbor's missus and his daughter both being deprived of a father and husband. Even though he was erratic and violent, she stuck with him and he seemed to genuinely care about his daughter. I don't know if his wife was involved in his habit as well, but she never showed signs of it, and as people will say, it is easy to tell if someone is on it once you have been around it long enough. Anyway, if I post again, it will be about another neighbor from hell, except this one was mad as a cut snake, but gave the illusion of competency, knowledge and lucid thought, but really, he was just an absolute unit. And I gotta say guys, speaking of drugs, one of the huge differences between Western countries and especially Germany and Thailand is that for certain drugs here, the punishments can be extremely severe. That is probably one of the reasons why you don't see junkies shooting up drugs into their arms in train stations like they do in Germany here in Thailand. In certain parts of Germany, basically, if you go to a train station at midnight or later evening, it's almost guaranteed that you see a junkie somewhere who is shooting something up. Then again, also here in Thailand, drug use is common. I guess it is just more done privately and not really out there in the open. At least I haven't seen it so far. The next one is titled Fairfax Homeowners Group Humbled by Court Battle with Residents. The feud that consumed Fairfax County's Old Belhaven would span 4 years and cost the community as much as $400,000, and it was ignited by one of the smallest of sparks, an Obama for President sign. The modest placard Sam and Maria Ferran planted in their yard during the 2008 election put them on a collision course with the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. It was 4 inches taller than the association's covenants allowed.
Need I say more? This would lead to chaos.
A neighbor fretted in an email about the precedent that would be set if the sign was not removed.
Our property values would be put at risk.
Such HOA disputes are as suburban as cul-de-sacs and 2-car garages, but few metastasize into legal battles that spend years in the courts, break legal ground and bankrupt the HOA. Most damaging of all, though, was a move probably unprecedented in area neighborhood feuds. The common area, that is the literal and metaphoric heart of Old Belhaven, was put up for sale last year to settle its debts. It appeared that the square, as some called the neighborhood, would no longer have a square. It destroyed our community, Maria Ferran said. The battle lines in Old Belhaven were starkly drawn. On one side, the Ferran said that they were standing up to an HOA run amok. On the other, HOA supporters saw a couple that inflicted financial ruin on the association and their neighbors to make a point. Experts say such feuds are becoming more common with the tremendous growth of HOAs, which typically require residents to sign covenants governing architecture, landscaping and other matters when they move into an association neighborhood. The HOAs collect dues and often have the power to fine residents who don't comply with the covenants. There were 10,000 association-governed communities in the United States in 1970, and by 2012 the number had reached 324,000, according to the Community Association Institute. 1 in 5 Americans lives in a neighborhood governed by an association. Their growth means that there are a lot of people in HOAs who have not necessarily bought into the lifestyle, said Evan McKenzie, a University of Illinois professor who has written 2 books on HOAs. Some like the higher level of rulemaking, but others don't like the fines and control. You have conflict when these groups come together. 1 community, 2 camps. Sam and Maria Ferran, a wine broker and a government lawyer, moved to the 44-unit townhouse community in the Alexandria section of Fairfax in 1999. In many ways, it is a typical Northern Virginia neighborhood with tidy houses and a mix of government employees, service members and professionals. The townhouses line the 3/4-acre square, which is the neighborhood's central feature and the site of most community-wide events. Without the green plot, it might be difficult to call Belhaven a community. The Ferran said the HOA had a reputation for hardline stances. In one case, board member Don Hughes compared some residents' refusal to install window pane dividers to the
cat and mouse game Saddam Hussein played with the USA.
Emails show. Ultimately, Hussein paid the price, he said, concluding that the residents should comply. Nevertheless, the Farrans were surprised when letters arrived in October 2008 telling them and others that their political placards were too large.
This is our final request,
Hughes wrote on behalf of the board. Emails showed that Hughes pushed the board to act. He wrote that he was prepared to make a motion to put a lien on the Farrans' house if they did not comply. He called sending a letter a
teaching moment.
Hughes declined to comment. The Farrans, I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, were angry. They acknowledged that the sign broke the rules, but said it seemed like an assault on free speech to go after a minor violation during the height of an election. Their response: cutting the placard in half, they planted OBA and MA signs in their front yard. The prank did not amuse board members and they decided to act. They passed a resolution allowing the board to fine residents up to $900 per infraction for violating HOA guidelines. Across the country, fining authority has been controversial, with HOAs hitting residents with levies for such transgression as displays of colored Christmas lights and patches of dead grass. Board members believed that they had the right under Virginia law, but the Farrans saw an illegal power grab that had no basis in the HOA's covenants. When the board, acting at a meeting that was not publicly announced, rejected the Farrans' roof and deck projects for aesthetic and architectural reasons, the Farrans said it was retribution. "It's like we were not living in America," Maria Farran said. "You are always one board election away from a tyranny." They wield enormous power. The Farrans filed a lawsuit against the HOA, saying it did not have the authority to impose fines and had vindictively rejected their home improvements. Board members were taken aback. They saw residents who would not abide by the rules that had made Old Bellhaven a great neighborhood and who were willing to resort to drastic action to get what they wanted. Archie Umflett, one of the neighborhood's oldest residents, put it this way:
"When it comes to the Farrans, it's their way or the highway."
A costly conflict. The legal fight consumed Old Bellhaven. The Farrans said HOA backers told them to move. They found bullets in their yard. Someone implored a priest at their church to prevail on the Farrans to stop the lawsuit. A local real estate agent said the infighting was scaring off some home buyers. "It was a crusade," a supporter of the Farrans said. On the other side, board members said that the Farrans were unreasonable and that they declined numerous offers to begin settlement discussions. And as the case ground on, the HOA increased dues from $650 a year to about $3,500, mostly to cover legal fees. The board's former president, Jim LeBlanc, said the situation put a strain on some elderly residents living on fixed incomes. Some had their health impacted, LeBlanc said. "There is a sense of, what is it going to take to resolve this? This was a tragic nightmare." The Farrans said that they, too, had made attempts to settle matters, but that those overtures were rejected by the HOA. In 2010, a county judge sided with the Farrans on the fining issue. The case set a Virginia precedent that HOAs cannot claim powers such as fining that are not specifically laid out in their covenants. The roof and deck issues, which had been spun off into a separate lawsuit, were decided in 2011. Another county judge ruled that the board's votes to reject the home improvements were improper because they came at a secret meeting and followed arbitrary standards. The HOA was on the hook for about $100,000 to cover the Farrans' legal fees, and it owed hundreds of thousands more for its own legal expenses. The HOA was financially ruined. LeBlanc said the association did not have the money to cover the bills, so residents voted for bankruptcy. Late last year, a court-appointed bankruptcy trustee put the community square up for sale to cover the HOA's debts. The Pleasant Square, with its trees and benches, had in better times been the site of community picnics and Christmas festivities. Now it was a reminder of the community's plight. A red and white "for sale" sign drove home the point. A developer began negotiations to buy the plot but pulled out. The developer had received anonymous threats, then a former board president stepped in and put up a gift of $60,000 to facilitate a settlement. A judge approved the plan, but the Farrans filed a motion Friday opposing the settlement because it relied, in part, on the use of capital funds. What will become of the square remains an open question. But the damage was done. Large gatherings on the square have all but ceased. LeBlanc said, for now, individual residents are paying out of pocket for the plot's water, electricity and maintenance. The Farrans have built their deck and their new roof. And Old Belhaven is set to begin discussing what form the HOA will take as it emerges from bankruptcy. LeBlanc hopes the wounds will heal in time. There really, truly was a sense of community here, LeBlanc said, that was truly lost in this process. And Ripe stars, unfortunately we have already reached the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content. However, if you cannot wait for more Ripe content, then I suggest you head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where you can find more exclusive Reddit content read by me. Patreon subscriptions start at just $1 per month, and for $1 your name will show up at the end of each of my new videos. However, if you are willing to spend $3 per month, you will get access to more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos, mostly just no mother-in-law stories. However, please understand, I don't want to pressure anyone into spending money, because I am already incredibly grateful that you watch my videos every single day. Thank you so much for your daily support, it really means the world to me, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for the next video.